So first of all, the relatively new news is that VMware's entered the cloud space. The cloud that we had, the name of the cloud that we had for about 9 months was vCloud Hybrid Service, VCHS. So for many of us, just learnt to get those acronyms in the right order, and now VMware has changed the name to vCloud Air. So that's the new name, vCloud Air. So some consulting company out there has probably earned a lot of money from coming up with this name and done very well with that. But anyway, the vCloud Air is the new name for the VMware Cloud. So I've called my talk here, so applications, 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 and really the vCloud advantage, and really what that means for service providers or people wanting to become service providers. So just stepping forward then, really. Here is a picture of Steve Ballmer, now deceased, unfortunately. Well, not literally, but left, not running Microsoft anymore. But he had one of these sort of viral videos that went around a few years ago of Steve Ballmer at a huge conference, and he was jumping up and down, and he was saying developers, 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 and he just went on talking about developers in that way. And the video went round, and a lot of people sort of looked at it and thought, well, here's a sort of middle-aged, or sort of rather fat, bald, man jumping around, and how funny that is. But I think for many of the rest of us, we sort of realized that there was something that he was trying to say. And what he was really saying is that clearly the developers are creating the applications, and really it's the applications that that end users are consuming, and really it's those applications really which has given Microsoft that strength and that key role in the marketplace. So it may seem to have been a kind of funny thing that he was doing there, but really the emphasis on the developers really had probably more meaning than many people would have perhaps realized. And perhaps really what he could have really been saying was really applications, 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 and jumping around doing that. And indeed, if I had more self-confidence, I could perhaps just jump around and do that here, but I won't do that, don't worry. So really that's the thrust of really what I'm trying to talk about today, really is the value of the applications, and really that's where intrinsically the value of the VMware Cloud comes from. That's going to be the essence of really what I'm trying to say or share with you today. So let me just step back here a little bit. So this is I just pulled this slide off Google Images. I just did a search for VMware virtualization market share. I haven't even used one of our own ones, so you'll be able to find this yourselves if you want to. Other things like this. So we can debate what share this is, if you like, going forward. But on the whole, VMware is a very strong position in terms of the number of people who use the VMware's hypervisor. Generally, the bigger the company, the more people tend to use it, and the smaller the company, the kind of slightly less the market share. But on the whole, VMware tends to have a leading position in terms of the hypervisor only. So I think few people would dispute that. And clearly here are some of the other people who provide hypervisors. And again, these shares can change a bit depending which survey you're looking at. But here's some of the other people. So, and you'll see why I'm emphasizing these other hypervisors in a minute. So first of all, this tangerine area here is Zen Server. And a very modified version of Zen Server forms the basis of Amazon's cloud, AWS. The sort of orange part here is KVM, and again, a very modified version of KVM forms the platform for Google's cloud. And the blue is Microsoft, and again, it's a modified version of Hyper-V, which forms the basis of Azure. So the reason I've emphasized that really is that when we look at cloud, and really what we're trying to emphasize is something that we call hybrid, and we tried to coin this term hybrid, but it's become a little bit distorted as we've moved forward. But when we talk about hybrid cloud, what we in VMware are trying to say is that AWS have really created this market 8 years ago. So Elastic Cloud Compute is just over 8 years old now. In summer 2006, Elastic Cloud Compute came out. So there's nobody yet who really manages, who can offer the suite of services that AWS offers. And clearly this is AWS at the moment is the king of the infrastructure as a service cloud. But the problem, if you like, for a customer, and really if you were going to start, if I just step back, if you were going to start out in the cloud now, if you were a young person, you're going to start out in the cloud, you want to develop the next Facebook or something else like that, then really probably AWS is the best place to be, really, if you wanted to do that, frankly. But the problem that we're trying to emphasize here is that if you're a VMware-based customer and you've got a lot of apps that you've put together down here, and you want to move some of those apps into AWS, the problem is that you would have to go through some sort of a conversion process to move an app, a collection of VMs into AWS, and it would be even more hassle to try and bring it back. So it is possible to do, and in fact there's a whole industry almost of small companies like Racemi, Rivermeadow, Hotlink, Cloud Velocity, and there's half a dozen other sort of startup-y kind of companies providing utilities and things to help with this kind of conversion process. On the whole, the same principle would apply for Microsoft Azure, and the same principle would apply for Google Cloud. Now, this is, I'll just come back to that in a second, but the story that we're trying to put forward is that the VMware vCloud Air cloud, or indeed the vCloud Air network of the VMware-based partners that we have, the same story would apply here in that this platform is vanilla vSphere, so it's not a modified version of vSphere. And what that means is that a customer here could move workload from here to here, and indeed move it back without any kind of conversion. So that's the essence, really, of the VMware story. So these other clouds have different places to be in. So as I was saying, if you're a young person starting out and developing the next Facebook, AWS is probably the best place. If you're doing that with .NET, clearly Microsoft will be better, and Google seems to be trying to position itself in the kind of high-performance computing space. Clearly, they've got some sort of things that they're trying to create as a kind of niche area here. But the VMware story really is this compatibility between the cloud that's here and indeed the on-premises environment here. That's, if you like, the unique story. And the cloud is much bigger than that, of course, but that's the unique story for VMware's cloud as we go forward. So it's this idea that this environment here, which a customer could grab, in the cloud, could be treated as a logical extension of the on-premises environment. That's the ethos behind this here. So the key selling points from a VMware point of view in this particular area of this compatibility with a VMware on-premises environment, the key angle that we've got here is that clearly, as we mentioned, there's no conversion of the applications. The customer could use the same tool on-premises and indeed in the cloud. The same networking could be used, so the same layer 2 networking can be stretched across, and indeed a customer could call the same help desk. So that's the principle behind really the VMware cloud. And I'll come on to how that's relevant for service providers and people wanting to move into that space in a second. But it's important to understand where it is that we're coming from. So with that as a kind of background, and just to kind of emphasize that, so really because this is vanilla vSphere, everything that is certified to run on vSphere will run in the vCloud Air cloud. So we've got 45 operating systems listed here. There's another 45 that are not listed. So there's 90 odd operating systems here. AWS supports 33 operating systems. Azure, perhaps slightly different, supports less, 7 operating systems here. And in fact, one of the things that we really try to emphasize, and we're quite proud of, is that clearly, the vCloud Air platform supports more operating systems than Microsoft Azure itself. So really, that's just because really it's completely compatible with the vSphere environment. So this is a chart that a colleague of mine put together, which I show quite often. I think it was quite good that he put together. So this vertical line is meant to indicate the next generation world here, the worlds of the Facebooks and the Netflixes and Zingers and things like that, where the code is written to take advantage of hyperscale and the cloud, and the resilience lies in the software. So this is a kind of sexy new world on this side of the chart here. This side of the chart really is the kind of world that most of us know of, really Microsoft applications, Oracle applications, those kinds of things, SAP applications. And clearly AWS has done a great job, so 0 to we think about 3 billion, and really that's the kind of bulk of the market really is AWS, done really well in that time frame. But if you compare that to the bulk of traditional workload that sits here, again, the Microsoft applications, Oracle applications that sits here, it's relatively small. It's probably a hundredth of the size, at least, of the workload that sits here. Now we know this green ball will over time move from left to right for sure. We know that's the way that it's going to go. But everything to do with software really moves at a sort of glacial pace, frankly. So it will move, but it'll probably take 10, 15 or longer years to move from left to right. You know, we can see the old operating systems that are out now. You know, people are still using AS400s and using the mainframe still. So that will take time to actually move from left to right. So if we look further on down here, so again, these are the clouds that are either designed for the new world or designed for the old world, if you like. So clearly AWS is designed for the new world. Clearly, you know, perhaps surprisingly, Azure is primarily in the new world as well. And Google Cloud, as it is now, and OpenStack, again, originally primarily in this space here as well. Interestingly, you know, AWS is sort of trying to come back this way into the more sort of enterprise space, and we know we will have to move from here, from left to right as over time, frankly, and we've got some things to address that. But really, there's one cloud that perhaps unashamedly is designed to address the old world, and that's either the vCloud Air product or the vCloud Air product of our VMware partners. So that's really the kind of positioning in terms of where we're coming from. So in terms of vCloud Air, this is where we currently have presence. So we have clearly a North American presence, which is where we started. So we have 5 or so data centers in North America. We have 2 in Europe, which are actually based in the UK at the moment, and we have 2 in Asia Pacific, in Japan, and also in China. So this is so already in less than a year we've got quite a reasonable footprint across the world, and I'll explain that. In fact, there's more coming as well. So in terms of products that we have within the vCloud Air portfolio, we currently have really some vanilla infrastructure as a service and the first of our backup solutions. But we do have much more coming. So disaster recovery, there's a whole roadmap and suite of products that's coming in the disaster recovery arena. So moving towards some of our site recovery manager-like capability, but at the moment there's a whole roadmap around the move towards that. We have desktop as a service, the platform for delivering desktop as a service coming. We have a PaaS, a platform as a service, which will be based on something called Cloud Foundry. It'll be, it's called Pivotal CF, so it's supported by our sister company Pivotal. So Pivotal CF is an open source PaaS, which we're delivering. So this comes out, so desktop as a service comes out in a month or 2. The platform as a service is really available now if people wanted to consume that. We have database as a service coming, probably around about the end of the year. So we have SQL Server and MySQL as the first 2 databases that are coming out as database as a service. We have an object store database similar to Amazon's S3 coming out early next year. We have PCI compliance, which should be done by next quarter, Q4. In Q4 we should have that, and we'll be having some sort of an application catalog, the first elements of that which are in place already. So these are things that are coming probably within about 4 months. Most of this will be available as well. So quite a lot in a relatively short time. Now, we've been going for about 9 months, but here was a survey carried out by RightScale, and in that survey, where the interviewers asked various companies, which clouds they were using. Perhaps slightly surprisingly, VCHS, as it was called, ranked quite highly. It ranked number 2 in the enterprise and number 4 in SMB. So I think that probably slightly flatters us, to be frank, but still it showed that there was good traction already with that. And we have won a couple of awards already for Best Cloud. So the Best Cloud at Interop. Interop is a conference all about interoperability. So clearly the fact that we can interoperate so well between on-premises and in the cloud, perhaps not that surprising that we won this award. And just recently we've won an award with Computer Weekly. So those are just some of the backgrounds there. So that brings me on to really how this may be of value to service providers. So, and again, this could be of service providers or those people who would like to move into the service provider space. So let me just step forward here with this. So there are probably a number of areas where we think this should be of value to service providers. So the first of these is this area around agility. So agility tends to be a sort of hackneyed term. People say, you know, we make you work faster, help you, be more agile and those sorts of things. Let me just talk through this scenario here. So if a service provider had won a new contract, for instance, and one of the requirements was to start very, very quickly, but the service provider didn't have resource available on premises to be able to deliver that resource, one of the things that a service provider could potentially do would be to grab some resource in vCloud Air, get started with the project that the customer wanted, and then when the capacity has been built out back in the service provider's own data center, perhaps a couple of months' time, just copy that workload back into the service provider's data center. So it means that effectively a service provider the lead time to deploy resource could be eliminated or certainly reduced very greatly. So that could be one of the resources there. And in fact, a few years ago, I was working with a service provider, helping a service provider, and there was a big contract for a large retail company, and they wanted to bring their capacity off Amazon because they were using Amazon to deliver their e-commerce environment. And one of the key requirements for that project was how long would it take to start? And the key element associated with that was the time to build the infrastructure out. Today, we'd be able to say to those people, you can get started straight away, you can start some work, and when you've built out in 3 months' time, you can just bring all that workload back. So a second area is really around cost savings. So a similar sort of thing would be, I guess a lot of service providers may have some element of contingency built into their infrastructure stack. So one of the things that we could say is that whatever you've got in terms of contingency, whether that's 3%, 5%, 10%, whatever it is, 15%, whatever that contingency layer is, effectively you could take that contingency back, invest that somewhere else in your business. Because that contingency, you could use VCHS to handle that contingency rather than having some capacity sitting there idle. So VCHS could handle the contingency for a service provider, the same principle that we just talked through. You could use that to start with, and you could just move that workload back when you're ready. A similar principle, but the same principle arises that if you had a customer who wanted to whom you were bidding to deliver some service for, but that workload was relatively peaky, one of the things you could do is you could say to the customer, rather than bidding for the peak requirement that the customer has, you could bid for the steady state environment, and you could simply handle the peaks using something like vCloud Air. So again, that means that when you were bidding in an RFP with this customer, if you understood the workload well enough, you could say, let me bid for the steady state, and I could contract out effectively the peaks to vCloud Air. So potentially allowing you to offer a more competitive solution to your customers. A third worst case scenario could be disaster recovery in the cloud. So as I mentioned, we have the first element of that disaster recovery available now. But what this means is that a customer on premises could replicate its disaster recovery capability into the cloud, into the vCloud Air cloud. And why this is potentially valuable is that quite often when people have a disaster recovery solution, the approach that they take is that they say, we'll take 50% of our production environment for our disaster recovery environment. So if we've got 100% here for my production environment, for my disaster recovery site, as a kind of rule of thumb, as a kind of guess, I'll just put 50% of whatever I've got here for my disaster recovery site, because that sounds like a kind of comfortable number. It's not quite as much there, but it's still a fair amount, so I should be okay if I have a disaster. The problem with that is that you never know, you can never really test 50% of the resource, so you never really know that if you have a disaster on your production site, whether or not that 50% capacity would really be able to stand up. And it's quite possible that it could even fall down. So it could even be that 50% of your capacity is not enough. It could be that 50% of your capacity is really zero. So the alternative would be, you've got 100% of your resource here, you can replicate into the cloud here, But rather than having 50% of the resource, all you need is a skeleton of what you've got. So let's say that's 20% of your resource here. But you know that if you have a disaster, you could scale that up to 100%. So now you've got a disaster recovery solution which is potentially cheaper because you've got 20% of the environment rather than 50%, but the integrity of that solution should be higher because it means that if you have a disaster, that customer should be able to recover his environment to 100% of that capacity just by scaling up in the cloud. So you could be able to scale out all his web servers, be able to scale out all his app servers to give him that capacity in the cloud. So arguably, this disaster recovery in the cloud solution should allow you to articulate a cheaper but a higher integrity solution to your customers. Then just a couple of other potential benefits, probably more for the service provider than perhaps for the customer. But one is this idea of the global footprint. So the idea would be that if you were a service provider and you were strongly represented, say in the UK or in Europe, one of the things that you could do potentially is that if you had customers who wanted to move to Asia Pacific or to the US or somewhere else in Europe, what you could do is just grab some resource from one of the vCloud Air data centers around the world, and you could deliver a service from one of those locations, in fact, probably without even having left the country. So it means it could transform a service provider from being a strong local player to potentially a global player overnight. And so I mentioned before, we've got UK, USA, Japan, and China, and really coming probably next year are a number of other places, Germany and France, and probably Singapore and Australia, and Canada and Brazil also being planned as well. And probably the last thing that I mentioned is that I've talked about vCloud Air, which is VMware's own cloud, but there are really hundreds of other VMware cloud partners who have built their clouds on exactly the same software stack that is in vCloud Air. So really any of the all the capability that I've talked about in terms of the portability of applications applies to those people as well. So if there are customers who, for one reason or other, are not happy with the vCloud Air service, they're not happy with the terms of service, not happy with the fact that we're an American company and the Patriot Act might apply to us and those sorts of things, one of the things we'd say is, well, if you're not really happy with this, then you can go to one of our partners. And you could really get more or less the same capability as we can deliver, but really the principle is the same behind that. So certainly with things like the Patriot Act, we're more than happy to say go to someone else if you really think that's an issue. So just to finish off then really, the way we've operated so far, one of the interesting things about VMware is when we introduced this cloud environment is that we introduced it initially as a partner-led cloud. So in some ways that seems a kind of contradiction in terms. People tend to think of the cloud and the internet and everything like that as a means of cutting out the middleman. But this was designed from the beginning as a partner program. And when we first delivered it 9 months ago, we delivered it to fit in with a standard VMware channel. So it would be sold, here's VMware, be sold through a distributor. There would be some partner, a value-added reseller who would sell it onto the customer. VMware would maintain the SLA and have the support relationship for the cloud, but the partner would have the kind of billing relationship, markup relationship, the wrap of all the services and things like that. That was the original design point. But as we progressed, we've realized that there was another model which is important, and this is more of the service provider model, the managed service provider model. And here, again, it would be sold through some distributor or an aggregator, and but in this case, the service provider themselves would actually be the VMware customer. And VMware would have a relationship between VMware and the service provider in terms of supporting them, but VMware may not know who all these customers are that the service provider has unless the service provider wants to share those details with VMware. So where we are at the moment is we currently have this model, and we're now in the process of understanding how this model needs to work. And we're in the process of going forward with a small number of service providers to actually to run this between now and early next year. We're going to go through a sort of pilot phase with a number of service providers, quite a small number. And we're going to determine these sorts of things with them. How it should really work, what the pricing structure needs to be, what sort of service levels service providers need, which applications are most critical for them. There's been quite a lot of talk about people saying they want to white label this kind of capability. Is it really white labeling they want, or would they really want some sort of VMware branding in there as well? So things like that we would really need to determine with them going forward. This will be integrated into the VMware Service Provider program, which already exists, probably early next year, as I mentioned before. So we already have a small number of people that we're working with. If any of you are interested in this, then please grab me in one of the breaks or at the end, and we can talk further. But we will be going forward with a small number of people to investigate how this works. So this could apply to service providers who are interested in doing this, managed service providers primarily. And indeed, it could apply to those people who aren't really service providers, but who are really more in the sort of traditional reseller mode, but who would like to move into the managed services space. And this could be a means of moving into the managed services space, for relatively little cost. Becoming a managed service provider without incurring the cost of acquiring data centers, building out data centers, and those sorts of things.